The following is a jam-packed conversation full of information and emotion about telling stories and communicating with people with Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. During the conversation, two of our guests were available by Skype from the UK, and one person called in on Google Voice from New York. This means there are some slight hiccups in the audio that we were not able to fully erase. I think you'll want to listen anyway and enjoy the conversation. Americans are growing older, and in just a few years, the whole world is going to be growing older. By the year 2035, there will be more senior adults than kids in the U.S.
You know, that's already happened in places around the world like Japan and Italy. Even middle-income countries such as China and India, while they are very young right now, are expected to get much grayer much faster.
So in order to talk about the future and the future of words intelligently, we have to understand that the future is going to include a much older population, and that brings with it social and economic and cultural consequences. And one of those consequences, one we're already seeing, is likely to be a significant rise in the number of people with dementia. I remember the first person I met with dementia. She was my landlady when I lived in Boston. And one interesting thing about having a landlady with dementia is that she sometimes couldn't remember that I lived there, which was inconvenient. But she was also one of the most accomplished people I have ever met. She was originally from Ireland. She had a master's from Harvard and had taught for 29 years in Newton Public Schools without missing a day. It was one of the few things she still remembered, and she would tell you that same speech every time. I taught for 29 years without missing a day. And she had written a book called Haiku for You because she was an early advocate of using haiku to teach literacy to children. And she was profiled, I want to say it was Time magazine that profiled her and her work. And by the time I knew her, I didn't know any of that. I just knew her as a person with dementia. So it was very hard to see this incredibly accomplished woman, and yet the person that I was interacting with who couldn't even remember that I was renting her attic.
Well, you know, and so the world isn't going to get more interconnected and technologically dependent. It's simultaneously going to get older. So the future doesn't look like kids using technology. It looks like older adults, perhaps older adults with dementia using technology as we are today.
And what does aging and dementia mean for the future of words?
Can stories create bridges between generations? Can storytelling be an effective way to communicate with people with dementia?
To talk about that, we've invited three true experts in dementia and communication. And I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time.
Me too.
Hi, I'm Holland Webb.
Hi, I'm Amy Boland.
And you're listening to the Afterword, a conversation about the future of words.
Dr. Jennifer Bute is a fellow of the Royal College of General Physicians. She served as a doctor in a rural part of Southern Africa before returning to the UK to undergo further training. Eventually, she secured a leadership position with the largest family practice in Southampton, England, an unusual feat for a woman in those days. Jennifer resigned after 25 years of service there due to receiving a diagnosis of young-onset Alzheimer's. She now lives in a dementia-friendly village and writes and speaks about dementia from the inside. And welcome, Jennifer. Can you share with us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I don't actually have Alzheimer's discovered. It's early onset dementia. Alzheimer's actually is about 50% of people with dementia. When I was working in the privileged position that I told you about, it was really quite embarrassing chairing an important meeting and asked everyone to introduce themselves. I didn't know who they were, but they were my colleagues. So eventually I resigned, which was great sadness to me because I love my work. And I couldn't manage my garden and house or reckon guests. So we moved to the Dementia Inclusive Village where I now live, and I'm happy here.
Well, thank you for the clarification because, again, I think that's something that many of our listeners are confused about is the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on.
And Our second guest is Louise Morse. She's a cognitive behavioral therapist with a master's degree emphasizing dementia. She serves as media and communications manager for the Pilgrim's Friend Society, a UK-based charity that enables older people to flourish as God intended through care homes, residential housing, and support for churches and communities. Together, Jennifer and Louise authored the book Dementia from the Inside. Welcome, Louise. How did you become involved in dementia work, specifically in communication?
Well, first of all, can I say that the rate of new cases of dementia is actually dropping, and they feel they're getting out of it. So it may not be the rather somber forecast you mentioned earlier on, or was just about it. I became involved in it as part of my work with the Pilgrim's Friend Society. When I first started with them in 2000, in the care and in the retirement housing, you'd find maybe 3%, 4% of people who were, quote, confused, used to be called then. But now, when I go around the care homes and talk to people there, the percentage is much higher. It's about 70%. What really got my interest was dread and the awful fear of dementia that we found among relatives and people in general. And particularly irksome was the belief that there was in those days that somebody with dementia, as the disease progressed and they became less and less the person they were used to seeing and knowing, the feeling was that the person was dying little by little. And I knew that it was rubbish because the scripture says that it's appointed unto man once to die, and after that. So I began doing research. I began digging around. And then I decided somebody has to write a book to put this into a real context. And as far as I know, the first book to be written in a spiritual, in a Christian context, which included that aspect of it as well. Because I think it's also important to note here that we're all in a continuum, that this is a temporary journey to our eternal. And it's with that perspective in mind that I wrote.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, our final guest for this conversation is Jordan Gross. He's a true Renaissance man. Jordan holds a master's from the Kellogg School of Management. He is an author, a TEDx speaker, the founder of a fitness blog and food delivery service. Jordan started an Alzheimer's awareness group called They Forget, We Remember, which gave him opportunities to serve as a junior board member for the Northwestern's Cognitive, Neurological, and Alzheimer's Disease Center, as well as for the youth movement against Alzheimer's. Welcome, Jordan. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Amy, thank you so much for that very kind introduction. I truly appreciate it. And Holland and Louise and Jennifer, I just want to say it's such an honor and a privilege to be having this conversation with you guys. I've been looking forward to this one in particular for a while, and I'm currently doing a 90 podcasts in 90-day journey about my new book that's coming out, but it's always when I have these conversations that are a little bit more aligned with my roots in really where I all got started, which was starting that They Forget, We Remember organization at my school when I was 20 years old. So I'm just so excited to be here and talk a little bit about Alzheimer's prevention from the youth perspective, right? Because I'm 24 at this stage in my life. And I use some pretty proactive approaches to overcoming and hopefully battling any Alzheimer's type of disruptions in our lives moving forward. So I'm just so excited to be having this conversation. I can't wait to see where it goes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, let's start with you, Jennifer. You've been living with dementia for quite a few years. How do you view it now?
Well, I've been amazed at the opportunities it's given me, but it's not always easy. I've had a privileged background of training people, of training and in medical education. I love people, and as a doctor, I always wanted to help all my patients to make the most of their personal potential. And everyone has equal value, no matter what their background, social standing, physical, mental, or emotional limitations. And now I'm just focused on those living with dementia and those involved with them. And I've never had these opportunities otherwise. And I live amongst others on this path now. And I speak at conferences, I appear on media and TV, and I hear their stories. And I'm still learning. And all that I learn, my son helped to turn this into teaching videos to help others, because I'm all for it, to help other people.
Wow, that's wonderful. That is absolutely wonderful.
Let's mention there that Jennifer often speaks at our conference. She gives talks. I mean, Jennifer is used to speaking to medical professionals. She's used to training. She's used to lecturing. But more and more, she comes into our world. She speaks at our Christian conferences. Whenever she speaks, people are so encouraged. The very fact she stands and she says, I'm okay, I have dementia. My dementia is not me, this is me. It's so encouraging. And could I just mention too, if you Google the Caerphilly study, BBC, you'll see the best examples of dementia prevention in the world. It was a 35-year-long study run out of Cardiff University by Professor Ainsworthy, and it showed by following these simple life guidelines, which we all know, they're summarized there, you reduce the risk of dementia, or it was reduced by 64%.
That's fantastic. We will definitely include that on our website as a possible resource. And then maybe, Louise, I can get you to email that direct link to me, because then we would love to put that in our show notes. And I would imagine, Jordan, that might be something that would be interesting to you in your work, would be this study about prevention. Thank
Absolutely,
you, Louise.
Yeah, I would love to see that as well. That sounds wonderful.
So, Louise, people around the world are using creative storytelling to help reach the person who is still living there inside this condition of dementia. So can you tell us a little bit more about using stories to communicate with dementia patients?
Well, Jennifer is actually the expert on doing that. I'm more expert at using stories to help caregivers understand how they can reach the person with dementia. Because although I work for a charity that its main focus is now care homes and retirement housing, I also see hundreds of people a year at Christian events who come with questions. They're ordinary people, mum, a daughter, a brother, a son, a spouse, and they find themselves suddenly cast into this totally strange role. They're hugely unsupported here in the UK. So I use stories to communicate them, to show them, like little case studies really, rather than speaking directly to the person with dementia. Now, I know from writing the book with Jennifer and from with Jennifer that she is, I think she's probably the world's best expert, without exaggerating, people with dementia to communicate with her, to come out from what one New York journalist in his book calls Pluto. He's written a book called Pluto. He has dementia. He's doing everything in his power to avoid going to Pluto. So Jennifer is really good for that. She's best answering that.
Well, that's slightly different, Louise. There are two things here. I use stories in my teaching and my lectures.
Yes.
Because people remember stories.
Yes.
They identify situations. And in my weekly Facebook blogs, I do stories about people and situations because it helps to teach people how to handle situations. But that's different too, and I forgot.
The other thing was stories to people with dementia themselves.
Oh, that's quite different. That's quite different.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because, you know, the lead at the Hallamshire Memory Clinic in Sheffield found a very important aspect of testing whether a person had or not dementia. There are a lot of misdiagnoses with dementias, mistaken for so many other things. And one was, could they hold in their working memory sufficient facts to be able to form an answer to a question that held more than one, a sentence that held more than one question. So when you tell somebody with dementia a story, the question is, can they hold up facts in their head to appreciate the story? So stories help, as Jennifer said, but whether or not they're the right way to approach people or even help people with dementia, I'm not sure. In one of my worshipping with dementia, there are small touching stories little scriptures, and then there's a story. It's no more than about 80 words. And people tell me they found this very helpful with their loved ones with dementia, or when they go into care homes with dementia.
That does make sense. And I appreciate both you and Jennifer being able to speak to kind of two sides of the same coin. One, the caregiver needs the story to relate to what's going on, but then the person with dementia uses the story to help remember the facts and hold those pieces of the story in their mind a little bit easier. Yes?
Right. Well, stories are powerful.
Yes.
Because they join the dots. First of all, stories establish the dots, and then they help you to join the dots. It's usually a linear joining. So it's helpful in strengthening cognition, but also it can be a challenge. It depends at which stage the person with dementia is, really. I mean, I just told Jennifer a fascinating story earlier on, which I won't repeat here, although it is fascinating. She followed every inch of it and appreciated it.
Lovely. Lovely. How about you, Jordan? What about stories? And I know you use stories in some of your work as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So I love this question because stories are truly everything in what I do. And I'll speak from both perspectives as well. So when I created They Forget, We Remember, I have the kind of personality where I'm going to fully immerse myself in whatever world that I am embarking upon, whatever journey I'm going into. So at the time, I was volunteering at a local center for dementia patients. And the one thing I definitely want to make mention of that maybe we could even implement into the conversation going forward is that I have always been using the term care partner as opposed to caregiver, because whether it is a family friend, a family member, or just a volunteer, the person giving care is just as much part of the process and the situation as the actual patient, her himself. So as a care partner, storytelling was such an impactful part of the process, because some days I'd walk in and I would be Clark Gable, right? And I would be a young Clark Gable, and the people who I was working with, they would ask for my autograph, right? And I would create these elaborate stories about how I started my career. And I didn't even know who Clark Gable was, honestly. But I would use stories to just continue the conversation and live in the moment, right? And I know later on we might mention this, but improv was such an important tactic in the way that I cared with and for the people who I was working with, because it was that rule of yes and, right? So every single time I would hear something from anybody in the Alzheimer's community, it was always yes and, right? How can I continue the story? How can we build so that the conversations are genuine and authentic, rather than constantly trying to negate or shut down whatever anybody was trying to say, right? So that's the storytelling component from the care side of things. But then there's also, from the side of prevention, I think what storytelling really lends itself to is creativity. And we've mentioned it here in the conversation a little bit, telling creative stories, whether that be in the fictional world or from our own lives. It gives an opportunity to really work our brains. So one thing I'll add is that even with my parents, right, they just turned 60, and every single day I try to get them to either do the daily crossword puzzle or Sudoku or something like that, because what that allows them to do is really utilize their brains in a way that they may have forgotten about in the past, or that they're not doing anymore because they're not getting any proper education and things like that. So the storytelling component really comes down to creativity and utilizing our minds to our best abilities, so that we're making sure that it's a muscle at the end of the day, right? So we want to work those muscles at all times so that they stay strong and they stay confident and powerful.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Jennifer, time travel gives us an opportunity to tell stories. Can you share with us a little about time travel?
Yes, time travel is the phrase that I use to describe those with dementia who think they're living in an earlier decade, before people they knew were married, or before they'd met people, who they now know, or 4 friends who have died. There's no point arguing. We need to enter the reality and confirm them in it, often enabling them to return to their own. I'll tell you a story. I was sitting with 2 other with dementia, and I said to one of them, "Lovely to see your son today." "Don't have a son." So I mentioned his wife. "I'm not married." He was not lying. He was time travelling. I reckoned it had been to about the time of the war. So I asked the other person to tell some of his war stories, confirming the person in his reality. And soon they were reminiscing together. And after about 2 minutes, the first one turned to me and said, "You were right. I do have a son."
How about that? That's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing.
Louise, did you want to add anything to that?
I want to say that it's just a little point. Jennifer has explained that very powerfully, and that's a story that we also put in the book too, Dementia from the Inside. There is quite a bit of emphasis nowadays on reminiscence therapy and all our items, objects. One home even has an old-fashioned bus stop that people with dementia can sit by as if they were waiting for a bus. And I think that as a therapist, I'm aware how powerful our life journeys are. And some chapters in the book of that life journey are more powerful than others. But I'm not sure actually if reminiscence therapy to actually take somebody there is such a good thing. It's more about a person is time traveling and knowing about them so that you can recognize the part in their lives that they're now in and not argue.
That's a great tool. I think that's something that I have heard others get in a trap of arguing with someone about their reality in that current moment. And that's a great tool.
Well, you should never do that. I mean, at one stage, there was a clinical psychologist here who wrote a book for his mother-in-law, actually, or about his mother-in-law's work. The book is called Condensed Dementia. It sold 20,000 copies in about 4 months, and it described exactly the way of communicating, empathizing that we're just describing. But the Alzheimer's Society was against it. It wanted something called reality orientation, where you said to the person, "No, you're not. It's not the fact. This is the case here now." Now the whole way of looking at it has changed.
Jordan, you have a great story that I've read on a couple of interviews that you've done, and you said the phrase, "Alzheimer's made me a man." Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, absolutely. So I hope I'm telling the right story here, but I'll just say more so in general. The way that I came into the Alzheimer's world was through a very personal connection. When I was 20 years old, my grandfather passed away, and he was this very gentle, very kind, very loving man who, since I was 14 years old, he had Alzheimer's, and he never really got to see the man who I was able to become. So when he passed away, I gave sort of an impromptu eulogy, and I looked around and I just said that with all the opportunities I have available to me at Northwestern University in Chicago, I'm going to do something for the Alzheimer's community, and I'm going to do something to honor my grandfather's legacy. So that's when I created They Forget, We Remember, and I was able to realize the true power of community. I was able to realize the true power of support. I was able to realize the true power of volunteering, of education, of fundraising, and ultimately the true power of awareness. Because once I said at Northwestern that I was starting this student group for people who were in some way, shape, or form impacted by Alzheimer's, whether it be a family member or a friend or a family friend, I was flooded with emails, with notes of support, with letters, with conversations around campus. And in starting this group, I do say that it really it turned me into the man who I am today, because I think for so long I was searching for who I was, and I didn't really find it until my grandfather passed away, and I created something that was much larger than myself. So that's why I say that it really is the turning point for the man that I ultimately have decided to become.
Well, that's a lovely story. Thank you so much for sharing that. Appreciate that. Louise, you did already give a little clue into what you would like for carers or care partners, caregivers to know about having conversations with people. Is there anything a little bit more specific that you could share on helping us understand to have those conversations?
Yes. I'm being poked by Jennifer here.
I love it.
Something. What do you want to say? Say it quickly, and then I can speak.
Okay. Well, it's not just Alzheimer's. That's just a small part of your life in all the dementias.
Yes.
So first and foremost, never start a conversation with a factual question.
Yes.
It makes us freeze inside. You can ask us how we feel. Why not use the we word? I might get told so doesn't speak anymore, so I go along and the person demonstrates to me. So, Mum, what did you have for lunch? Silence. So I say, oh, it's so lovely to see you, because feelings are so important. It makes them feel special. Oh, the sun has been shining. It's so beautiful to see the blue sky and the white clouds. I remember we used to lie on the ground and watch the clouds. Oh, yes. It was so lovely and peaceful then. So you see, we need to use the we word to enable people to join in with us. Or even the remembering.
Yes.
Rephrasing.
I think it's the we. It's that empathizing. It's that being there with them. It's because we communicate a lot without words. Words are important. Words are powerful. The words that we use can freeze somebody or release somebody. But often we communicate with our expressions, with our body language. And I believe in a way that people have a kind of emotional halo about them that comes over. I haven't analysed how that is portrayed yet, but I do find it, as I said, I speak in so many different places. And next week I'll be at New Wine, where there are 15,000 people who come every week. We don't see 15,000, thank God. But we see a few hundred of them. And each one approaches it as they approach. You can sense how they are. We all do this, but you have to refine that sensibility. I was in one of our care homes. I thought I'd escape with a cup of tea and read the newspaper before driving home, because I'd actually been showing around a visitor from Colorado, USA, who heads up a local community dementia work there, a very good one. And I thought, to this little room right by myself, and somebody followed me in and sat down, one of the residents. So I said hello, and she said hello, and she looked at me, knew she wanted some communication, so I said, it's a lovely day today. Now, I'd never seen her before, ever, and I said, and this room is so beautifully decorated. It's so very English. And she said, well, yes, but England is such a long way away now, isn't it? So then I knew. So I said, well, depends which sort of England you want, really, because just up the road is Oxfordshire. And she thought of it, and she said, well, really, it's the best part of it for you. It's what's best for you. And one thing I know about with dementia is they very often feel unsettled, and often a sense of place is important to them. So I said to her, well, remembering that this is a Christian home and she's a Christian, I said, I think that Jesus knows the best for us, don't you? He knows the best place for us. And immediately see the peace descending on her. And she said, that's right. So it's going with the person's flow, not dropping things down on them. I think it's just love in action, actually.
Yes, I appreciate that. Those are wonderful tips and tools and strategies to help us as we navigate this idea of communicating well and using our words well. And that idea that words can freeze or create fear, I think is a very powerful takeaway from that. Thank you for sharing that. Jordan, did you have anything to add?
No, I think that was beautifully said.
So, Jennifer, you learned a lot about being a carer for your father. Were there any things that were specific that you could share with us that might be supportive about how you did that with your father?
I'm very ashamed of how little I knew then. If I had known then what I know now, it would have been very different. For example, you might have thought that I was his wife. How happy I looked and behaved very much like my mother, who died when I was 4. And he got confused. And I'd try and reason with him and try and explain to him. But now I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, yes.
Show the photo of my mother, and I would get him to talk about her and memories of the past, what he remembered well. And I didn't understand about having to show people things. You know, he'd want to know where the bathroom was. I'd say, well, down there. But you have to show people the way. And he would be confused about it. And I'd try and explain that it doesn't work.
Mm.
Also, I made a book of letters, having got them from all his friends and relatives that were still alive, about his life, to help him remember. A long time before memory books came in. But now I would have pictures as well.
Oh, okay.
I did my best. It wasn't good enough. But that's what I do now. And at the end of my talks and lectures, people come up to me and say, if only I'd known this 10 years ago, if only I'd known this before. So that's why I'm so passionate about explaining to people.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and that's why that's really good that at 20 years old.
Jordan. Yes, 24.
24. Oh, 24. You are so old, Jordan, at 24. Just watch it now. Get to the gym every day. And quit.
Yeah.
But so good that Jordan, at the age of 24, can see that to avoid dementia, to find out all he can, to be a fuller person. And it's about, really, it's not just avoiding dementia. It's about living as full life as we can. Because as you said earlier, Holland, we're all living. There's a book by a professor of economics and psychology, Linda Grattan, and she wrote it, I think, in 2015, and she predicted, because of the age we're living to now, and you two, and especially Jordan, you're likely to live to be 100, whether you like it or not.
I'll try my best.
Your body looking young.
Yes.
You have to find out all you can to do the right things now. And so, no smoking, no drinking, no wild living.
Oh, that is so good.
That's amazing. Thank you. Thanks.
So I want to just kind of wrap up a little bit, and I would like to ask Jennifer, what is a key concept that we need to understand in communicating with people with dementia?
It's the feelings that are so important. Make them feel special and identify with them. And touch is important. I was called to help with a resident here who was being very disruptive. I knew nothing about her, never met her before. She was surrounded by people telling her to quieten down, stop throwing her arms around. So I set them all away and knelt down in front of her. Well, she was so surprised, she stopped shouting. And I smiled at her. Goodness, everyone else was glaring at her. So she gave me a little smile. And I said, oh, it's so good to see you smile. I took her hand, and she smiled even more. Thank you, you've made my day. And afterwards, I was asked, what had I said to shut her up?
Oh.
I hadn't said anything to shut her up. I had just made her feel that she mattered.
Yes. I think it's also knowing that the person remains. One of the experts has written that person's behavior, the person's expressions, like the person's expressiveness, they haven't checked. They're just reacting to the strange situations that are being created by the damage to the brain. The person remains. And we find that if somebody's always disliked dogs, we have pet therapy, they still dislike dogs. It's instinctive, So know the person. Get to know the person.
That's brilliant, Louise. If they didn't like dogs, they still don't like dogs. Jordan, how about you? What is an essential piece of communication that we need to think about as we're talking with those with dementia?
I'm just going to echo that statement because what I heard in there was my favorite thing in the world, and that is that it's all about smiles. And every single day I went into that care center, I literally had a goal of counting the number of smiles I could put on somebody's face that day. And I would try to beat my score every single day. And I would try to get 10 smiles and then 11 and then 12 and 13. Because every single conversation that you have with somebody, every single interaction, you have to be in the moment. You have to be very present. And the best way to really enjoy that presence in the most effective way possible is by focusing on the happiness. So it's all about smiles. I'll continue on with that statement and piggyback on that last comment.
You got 2 smiles. Jennifer and Louise were both smiling at you.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Jordan, can you go ahead and tell us about your new book? Has it already come out?
So, no, the new book is going to be out. So we're talking here in July. The new book's actually going to be out in more like January. But essentially, it was a way for me to use my creative skills. And I know we talked about creative storytelling, and in this world of giving advice and personal growth and development that I find myself in, something that I find beneficial for myself is to create my own unique spin and allow people to interpret the advice that I give rather than just give it. So I created a fictional book called The Journey to Cloud 9 that essentially reveals these life principles. It's a book about choice. It's a book about purpose and meaning and fulfillment. And the character goes on this path where in his real life, he didn't necessarily make the choices that he could have made and lived the life of his dreams. But he has this visualized experience, this journey through the clouds, where he's able to relive and see what his life could have looked like had he made the choices that were most aligned with his heart and his gut and his intuition. So that's what I call his Cloud 9. So coming back to the conversation here, it's all about how we can optimally live our Cloud 9 lives by making the decisions that we know are most in tune with our heart, our gut, our intuition.
And where can people find your book?
So people can find the book and all the information about it at journeytocloud9.com. It's all spelled out, journey, TOCloudNINE.com. And thank you guys so much for allowing me to share that. I really appreciate it.
Well, we'll connect that to our website and to our show notes as well. But thank you all so much. As we kind of close out part 1, it has been an enormous blessing, joy, looking at faces. I'm so glad that for those of you who are just listening to our podcast, we actually have Louise and Jennifer on a Skype call. So we're getting to have interaction with them. And then Jordan is on a Google Voice call. So we have all this technology and it's working beautifully. We're so grateful for this connection. But one of the things that Louise shared in this first episode is that stories establish the dots and connect the dots. What a lovely metaphor to think about. And I want you to be thinking about metaphors as we move forward into our next episode in part 2. But we want to thank you all so much for this opportunity to talk about stories and how stories impact those with dementia and how we can be better in communicating. So thank you, Jennifer and Louise and Jordan. We really appreciate your time today.
Join us next week for part 2 of our conversation with Dr. Jennifer Bute, Louise Morse, and Jordan Gross. We'll continue talking about using stories to communicate with people with dementia, who are a growing segment of the world's population. In the meantime, don't forget to subscribe to the AfterwordPodcast.com, like us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts, and leave us a review. It helps us keep the conversation going. As always, you are welcome at our table.